Okay everybody, hi. This is a quick little video on talking about EKG electrodes. There's another video where I'm actually applying the 12-lead EKG machine. Watch this one first, unless of course you've already watched the other one, and then this will explain the things that you couldn't see in the other one. In the other video I was trying to multitask. I was using a webcam, a GoPro, and my cell phone to record things, and I got a bit confused on which camera was actually doing the best work. So it's not the best video. It gets the job done. One of the things on that other video, I have a friend who is volunteering for me to do an EKG on him, and he had just taken a shower and had lotioned up before he came, so he was all slippery, and I was having a little trouble with the electrode sticking, which is a point that you have to contend with a lot of patients. You have to make sure you get the skin oil off and everything to make sure these electrodes stick. So I wanted to just give you a little bit of an idea about these electrodes. This is called a snap electrode. It has an adhesive back on it. So if I can get this one to even come loose. So it has this adhesive back on it, and that actually just sticks to the skin like that. And then the wire snaps onto that. So it just clips on, well, if I can get hold of the wire. And normally, again, your patient is laying down when you do this. So these kind of snap in. It's not doing it right now because I'm just not in a good position to do this, but that would clamp on, snap down, and that would lock that in place. Okay. You would use these type of electrodes if you had a patient who was sweating, or if they were going to be continuously monitored, or if they were going to get like a stress test where they were going to be exercising while they had these on. So that's when you would use these types of electrodes. Most of the time, you're going to use what we call resting tab electrodes. And these are resting tab electrodes right here. You can see that there's 10 of them on this one card. That's because it takes 10 electrodes to run a 12-lead EKG. And I'll explain that here in just a second. We have, again, these peel off, and they've got a kind of a gummy worm type adhesive on them, and they stick on. They're usually good for one stick, so if you end up having to move these around, then you're probably going to need a new sticker because they just don't work. The adhesive kind of goes away after the first try. Okay, you'll notice there's an area on this tab where there is no adhesive, and that's where we clip our wire to. We have a wire, put it on there, and clip this down, and that holds that in place. Okay, now these, you know, they stick for a little while, but then they give up that adhesive. So what you may find is that if you hook the wires up too early on your patient, you've put the electrodes on, you've attached the wires to it, and then you take time to put in all the information, the wires are going to start pulling the electrodes off, and that becomes an issue. So generally what I recommended this in the other video, is that you apply the electrodes, put the patient information in the machine, then attach the wires, and then run the EKG. So you want to attach the wires as kind of the very last thing you do, because otherwise they'll probably be popping off on you. In the old days, which I was around for those old days, we actually had suction cups. Instead of these little sticky things, we had suction cups, and you had to put a gel on the suction cups and then stick them to the chest, and then good luck because you had all these suction cups that were popping off while you were trying to get them all to stay on long enough to do an EKG. All right. So let me just show you the wire cradle here. So this is the wire cradle, and I have 4 long wires here, and then I have 6 short wires here. These long wires go on what we call the limb electrodes. We actually put these on the extremities. 2 go on the each arm, and then, or 1 goes on each arm, 1 goes on each leg. So that's 4. And then we have these 6 which actually go on the chest. Okay. In order to demonstrate that, with the way this video is, you can't get my whole body in there. These long electrodes, we would do what we call a modified limb lead placement. Normally, they would go on the extremities, right around the wrist or the ankles, or sometimes the upper arm and the thighs. We can put them there as well. But we want them fairly far away from these chest electrodes. But in the case of what we're doing now, we would put them, we're going to do what we call a modified limb electrode, and instead of having them down on the arms and legs, we're going to move them up to the chest. Those, we're modifying their position, and that's why they're called modified. They are labeled as to where they go. They're also color-coded, but you might be able to see this one says RL for right leg. This one says RA for right arm. This one says LA, left arm. And then we have left leg, or LL for left leg. So they're also color-coded. If you'll notice, I have a white, black, a red, and a green one. Okay, white, black, red, and green. And the way those go is white goes on the right, black, red, and green. Okay, white, black, red, and green. Now again, normally these are going to be out here on the extremities, further away from the chest, but if we're doing a modified lead placement, then they would go closer in. Then we have the 6 chest electrodes, and they are labeled V1 through V6. Now you don't have to pay attention to this color coding because that would get a little confusing. But they are labeled, like this one says V2, this one says V5, this one says V4. And it's very important that when you're putting these on, that you get them in the right spot. And the reason is that the EKG provides kind of a road map, or basically a map of the heart. And if you don't have these in the right place, then you may not get a true picture of what the heart is doing. Even though it's just a bunch of squiggly lines on a paper, that gives us a whole bunch of information. So we want to make sure that we have this lead placement down properly. And I go over it again on the other video, and I'll go over it again here in a second video because I need to get some other equipment available to do that with. But in any case, you need to make sure that these electrodes are put in the right spot. Okay, now I'll go ahead and show you where to put these electrodes, the chest electrodes anyway, but there's some other information I need to get for you, and I can send that to you in a PowerPoint presentation. So let me just show you where these electrodes go. And again, I wish I had a marker. I can't find a marker for my, let me see if this one works. Let me start over with that. Hopefully you can see that okay. Okay, so we have 4 limb electrodes, we have 6 chest electrodes. So we have the white one, which is right arm. Let me just write that out so we get that. It's listed as RA on the thing, so I'll just put it up here, right arm. And then we have black, red, and green. So the white is on the right, the black is on the left arm, the red is on the left leg, and the green is on the right leg. So we have the white one goes here, black, red, green. Now again, I'm putting them on the chest when normally we'd have these four on the extremities. When we look at the chest electrodes, we have V1, V2, I'm going to need more space than that. So go ahead and make note of these four limb electrodes, and then we'll look at the four chest electrodes. They are V1, V2, V3, V4, V5, and V6. So write that down real quick, and then I'll erase that and move on a little bit. White, black, red, green, V1 through V6. Okay? Now from these limb electrodes, in fact, let's just do it this way. So from these limb electrodes, I get the following pictures. Now the difference between, and this is incredibly important, the difference between an electrode and a lead is that an electrode is a sticky thing, kind of like a camera, and the lead is the picture that that camera gives us. So an electrode, thing that sticks to the chest that the wire's attached to, and the lead is the picture we get from those sticky little things. Now on the limb electrodes, these leads, or these electrodes, combine to give us different leads. So even though there's only 4 electrodes, we actually get 6 different pictures of the heart. Okay? So we get lead 1, lead 2, lead 3, and one called AVR, AVL, and AVF. So the 4 limb electrodes give us these pictures, lead 1, lead 2, lead 3, AVR, AVL, AVF. I'll define those for you later on. And then these chest electrodes, sometimes they're called precordial leads or precordial electrodes. They're a lot easier because the leads, generally, the picture they get is what's directly underneath each one of these. They don't combine with other ones to give us pictures like these do. Okay, so these 6 precordial leads are basically looking straight underneath where these things go. Okay, so now I want to tell you about the positioning of these over here. So let's talk about V1. Okay, V1 goes in a position which is on the right side of the chest, right of the sternum. At what we call the 4th interspace. And that is the space between the 4th and the 5th rib. There's a little gap there. So that 4th interspace is the gap between rib 4 and rib 5. V2 goes on the left side of the chest, on the left side of the sternum, at the 4th interspace. We'll put V3 on in a second. Let's go to V4. V4 goes in a mid-clavicular line. At the 5th interspace. Okay. I'm going to skip V5 for a second and move on down to V6. V6 goes in what we call a mid-axillary line. At the 5th interspace. Now, there's a little bit of play with that we'll talk about here in a minute. Okay, so we have V1, V2, V4, and V6. Those are the first ones we put in place. And then we go back and we put in V3 and V5. V3 goes between V2 and V4. V5 goes between V4 and V6, or in an anterior axillary line. So the reason I put these two on last is because the landmarks are basically where we've put the other ones. Okay? So let's find those positions. I'm going to use these resting tab electrodes to show you where these go. So V1 goes right of the sternum, on the right side of the sternum, at the 4th interspace. So how do we find that 4th interspace? There's two ways to do that. One is I can feel, here's my jugular notch right here, and I demonstrate this on the other video as well, but here's my jugular notch. Right next to that is what we call the sternoclavicular joint. It's basically where the sternum and the clavicle, your collarbone, come together. So this right here, that little bump off to the side is where your clavicle and your sternum come together. Okay? Underneath that is rib number 1. So if I march down to where I feel the first true rib, that is rib number 2. Okay? Now I'm off to the side of the sternum. I don't want to be directly on the sternum, but that's rib number 2. So the 2nd interspace would be the gap between rib number 2 and rib number 3. So I'm just going to walk down. 3rd interspace, 4th interspace. So my 4th interspace is going to be right about here. So I'm going to put V1 in that location. Right about there. Okay? And then V2 is going to go just exactly opposite that on the left side of the sternum. So there to right there. Okay? Now we said we were going to put V4 in place. So here's my clavicle on the left side. That's the full length of my clavicle. If I measure halfway and come down, it's going to be right under the left nipple. Where did my little card go? There it is. So this is V4. It's going to go right here. Now I'm going to put, and you notice I'm putting the little tabs so that they're aiming down so that the wires can come up and hit there. If you hear my cat yowling, he's trying to get in. I'm sorry. I'll close myself in the bedroom best I can. So V6 is going to go in a mid-axillary line, which is directly under the armpit, but I'm going to stay in that 5th interspace. And my rib cage angles up. So if I go directly under the armpit, staying in that 5th interspace, it's going to put it right about there. Okay? Now I'm doing this in a mirror, so I can't really tell you for sure. All right, now I'm going to take V3. Remember, V3 goes between V2 and V4. So V3 is going to go right about there. And then V5 is going to go right between the two. Now, this is a mid-axillary line, directly under the armpit. This is an anterior axillary line. If I drop my arm straight down to my side, this line right here is an anterior axillary line. Okay? All right. So this is the electrode placement, and we would hook the wires up, V1, V2, V3, V4, V5, and V6. And then I have 4 left on my card. These are for the limbs, the arms and the legs. Normally, we'd put them on the wrists, or we could put them here. But wherever we put it over here, we need to put it on the exact same spot on the other side. Because the machine does some certain calculations, and if we have put them in different places, it's going to give us errors in our calculations. Then I would also put them on the ankles as well. Okay? So that's pretty much it for this little video. Can't think of anything else I want to tell you right now. Watch this one, watch the other video, and again, I apologize on that other video because I'm trying to do too many things at once, trying to film it from too many different angles. So, but it still gets the job done. All right? So I'll see y'all in a little while.